YasminaReality.com.
There are times in our lives when we are experiencing a cognitive dissonance where the reality of a situation is muddied because it's uncomfortable for us to really face it. And when people try to bring up the conversation or help you to face the conversation, it's so uncomfortable that the first reaction is to lash out and to defend yourself, to defend your honor, and to defend your dignity. And what I'm talking about is white privilege. And any American person with white skin does have the benefit of white privilege. I don't believe anyone is exempt from it. And I think talking about this topic and talking about race with some white people who just refuse to talk about it or want to personalize it and make it about themselves, that want to make it into a conversation that surrounds their own individual personal morality, just goes to show that, some individuals just aren't there yet. And it's not to shame anyone because all of us white Americans have benefited from the systemic racism that has existed in this country since its inception. And to deny that is truly just to deny reality. And I'm not like a lot of these awesome speakers and civil rights activists and academics that come on and they're just so compassionate. We have to be compassionate, and that's cool, and compassion is great. And I don't want to shame, moderate white people that aren't trying to be racist, quote unquote, but who are being apathetic, which is a form of racism because it is a lack of action in a system and in a situation that is oppressing another person for the benefit of ourselves, whether we meant to do it or not. But at the same time, I'm just not one of those coddler people. And I'm kind of one of those people that might be a little harsher. I'm working on that, but I'm in my 50s now, and I'm not sure it's going to change. I'm trying to be kinder, but the reality is, people are dying. People are dying, and this issue is beyond, being American, being Christian, being whatever. Um, People are dying, and it just comes down to our collective humanity. Okay, I don't, care what color you are as a human being. You know, no one should have to die, be tortured in broad daylight, be lynched for their race, for the color of their skin. If George Floyd didn't look like George Floyd, but the same exact incident took place where there was an alleged $20 bill that was counterfeit, or whatever the allegation was. Whatever the law is in New York, where you're supposed to call the police if something like this is going on, whatever the situation over this $20 bill, if George Floyd had been a blonde, you know, hot cheerleader from, a football team from the NFL or something, would the cops have held her down and murdered her? If the person was a 20 something white hipster dude who did the exact same motions as George Floyd that afternoon, would the cops have put their knee on his neck for almost 9 minutes and murdered him? If it were a child, if it were any white person, would the cops have done that? So being brutally tortured in broad daylight and murdered for your race is just beyond. My 18-year-old daughter just said to me, "This is 2020." She just looked me in the eye and she's like, "This is 2020. What the hell's going on?" And I looked at her like, "Wow, did my generation and the generation before me screw up?" I'm looking at my daughter in the eye with shame. I'm hanging my head in shame in front of my kids, trying to help them grapple with a reality of a world that I brought them into. And I don't have answers for them. And it's to a point now where, coddling the emotions of white Americans who don't want to face the fact that all of us, whether we've chosen it or not, have a vested interest in the current system sustaining itself. The fact that we as white Americans have to accept the fact that we benefit on a minute by minute basis on the backs of Black Americans. And it's not right. It doesn't mean that white Americans don't suffer in their own right in their lives, that they don't struggle, that life isn't difficult, that they've had misfortunes. All of us have had that. All of us have had that. Every human has had all of those things. So, by virtue of just having difficulties in your life, it doesn't preclude you from also benefiting from the systemic racism that exists in the United States that is not getting better and sadly seems super grim when you really look at the situation. But I will always have hope and I'll continue to have hope. I look at the youth, the teenagers, the young adults, and they are standing up on their social media channels and they are posting about Black Lives Matter. I don't see them taking selfies right now and making duck faces. I see them posting about Black Lives Matter. That gives me like, oh, tremendous hope. I see them organizing their own rallies, their own protests for some of these youth. This is the first time they've written something on a poster that comes from their soul, that comes from their heart, and they're willing to stand on a corner during a week where there has been looting and rubber bullets and tear gas and gunshots and fires. They are willing to stand on a corner and hold up a sign to say Black Lives Matter. To me, I have goosebumps just reflecting on that and talking about that. I'm absolutely humbled by our youth and I'm just so proud of them. And it, they are the ones that are giving me hope that there is an opportunity for us really to turn this ship and make it right again. It feels hopeless, but when I look at our youth of today, I feel renewed hope. I feel rejuvenated in the thought that, you know what, this ugly cancer in our country, this cancer called racism, we can face it head on. And there does come a point where the situation is boiling over as it is now. And, people are flipping tables. Every human gets to a point where it's stick a fork in me, I'm done, and they're flipping the tables. And I think even, the worst critics that want to try to change the focus from the systemic racism into, oh, but there's looting and this and that and the other. Um, and we know a lot of that looting is being done actually by white extremist groups or people just trying to usurp the message or take advantage of the situation to commit crime or whatever. Um, but regardless, you know, there comes a point in any human being's, existence that they can only take so much. I mean, I would have been flipping the tables even more, um, even before George Floyd. But it should have never gotten to George Floyd. George Floyd is the boiling point, but he has, sadly, just a slew of George Floyds that have come before him. And this is a situation we have to face. Don't let people gaslight you and say, all lives matter. Don't let them gaslight you and say, well, the police lives matter. No shit. Yes, all of our lives matter and police lives matter. But police are not this perfect deity of, God, where they're not allowed scrutiny. They are public servants that we pay with our tax dollars and they serve us. Do they do a dangerous job? Yes, they do. So do a lot of other people too. Yes, they do a dangerous job. Yes, we're grateful to them. But if there is a brotherhood that sustains racism, that allows for the murdering and lynching of our black brothers and sisters in this country, then that has to be busted up. There is no brotherhood under a Constitution of America that defends a brotherhood of murder. So, you know, as difficult as it can be, I honestly, I'm not in the mode of coddling. There's probably other activists that, will coddle and be compassionate, whatever. I give props where props are due. And I also call out, um, call to actions and action alerts where they are due. And there's no skating this issue. There has to be a sweeping, absolute sweeping change from coast to coast, city to city, locality to locality in every single police department to address racism before these candidates even get into the position of even interviewing and getting a face to face interview before they're getting into the police academy. There has to be a much greater effort at vetting these humans, finding out if there's been any history at all in or around them or in their activities of being racist, of having any kind of violence. And we have to face the elephant in the room, too, that there is a segment of the police force, definitely not all of them, but a segment that joins to exert control over others because they have felt out of control in their lives, like many of us have. But you might get men, even women, that maybe were bullied in their life, that feel inferior because of their size, their abilities, whatever it might be, who join the force for the wrong reason, who want to put the badge on to maybe um, punish society for what quote unquote society has done to them in their lives. And that is not a reason to join the police force. It is not a motivation to be on the force. Maybe there's other things they can do as a public servant, but my tax dollars are not to put someone in a position where they are a danger to society. Our tax dollars paid for the lynching in broad daylight and torture of George Floyd. Our tax dollars paid for that. I mean, I'm not in Minnesota, but you get the point that it's American citizens' tax dollars that pay for policing in America. So we have to get to the core of this and say the reality. And we need to lock arms with our police forces. Yes, the majority are good. So we need to lock arms with them and give them permission and give them demands at the same time of what needs to happen. And I'm doing that in my local community. I am forming a task force in my own community. Um, and part of that is to actually sit down with our police department and have a pledge and a dialogue and a promise from them that we will discuss these issues, these race issues, that we will put the issue of race and racism and police brutality on the table. And it will be an ongoing discussion so that we could perhaps prevent this happening in my town, and then everyone in their towns need to do the same thing. We need to do this in all of our communities. If you're not comfortable being that spokesperson or being that person that's on the committee, you can be behind the scenes. You can nominate someone, you can inspire someone, you can encourage someone. But these conversations need to happen in every police force, in every town in this country, every single one. And it does start again with us as individuals because we are part of a collective whole in society. We can go through life as individuals and think that we are exempt from being racist because, hey, I have coworkers and friends that are black and, we get along and like, I'm not racist. Well, that default position of just, quote, not being racist, unquote, is not going to bring back George Floyd and it's not going to prevent the next George Floyd. It's just simply not. I honestly don't give a shit if you have black friends and you're not racist. What does that do for stopping police brutality? What does that do? So we need action now from everyone. We need people to actively be anti racist. We cannot just coddle people to be in the default state of, but I'm not racist and all lives matter. Not all lives are being tortured on the street for their race. So if you really, you all lives matter people, if you really believed that all lives matter, then the lives that are being tortured on the street, you would stop and be helping right now and be concerned about. But all you really want to do is just discuss how God loves all children and just make the uncomfortable conversation go away and then go back to what you're doing. And that's a cop out and that's complicity. And, you know, I'm sorry. There's kumbaya and hugs maybe to get from other people, from your clergy, whatever you got to do. But I don't know. I'm just a straight up person. And that's just the reality of what it is. You are complicit. All of us are complicit. All of us white people are complicit because we all benefit from it on a daily basis and we get apathetic and we don't listen to what black people are trying to tell us. We make it about ourselves and some do it worse than others, but all of us are complicit. And we have to finally stand up and look in the mirror, each one of us, white Americans, and admit that we've benefited our entire lives. Whether we meant to or not, we have benefited from the oppression of our black citizens. It's time for us to get over the discomfort of having the discussion about race. And it's time for us to face the fact that being apathetic is killing people. Being apathetic is racism. We have to admit that overt racism is one form of racism, but being apathetic and turning the other cheek and shutting down the conversation of our black brothers and sisters by saying, but all lives matter. When you say, but all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter, you're basically shoving your hand over the mouth of a black person who's saying, help me. And you are covering their mouth and telling them to shut up. And you're shutting down the conversation, which is basically keeping them in chains. So I don't want to hear about All Lives Matter because how come you don't bring up All Lives Matter when no one's talking about Black Lives Matter? How come you're only bringing it up when black people are saying, help me, Black Lives Matter? So it's time to cut the BS. And people's lives are at stake. And I would rather stand with the people whose lives are at stake and the truth and reality of a situation, as uncomfortable as it is. And I'm sorry it's uncomfortable, I understand. But I'd rather stand on that side than sit for the next 10, 20, 30 years until my life is over, coddling white people who just don't want to accept it. I honestly don't have time for that, and no one does. Um, so it's just time for people to just face it. There's an awesome book. I haven't read it, but I've been watching video clips and reading excerpts about it. I have it on hold at the library called White Fragility. And just the little bits I've heard and pieces I've read are, absolutely incredible. It's written by a black woman who's a sociologist who is that compassionate person that maybe I'm not when it comes to these issues, when it comes to the oppressor. I have compassion for the human race, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be talking about this, but I'm talking about I don't have the softest hand when it comes to the oppressor, whether you mean to be it or not. And I'm included in that. I'm being harsh to myself too. But that's a book that we can read, and there's so many other books. I'm seeing people coming out of the woodwork, posting educational materials and books that can help us all progress out of the situation we're in this cancer. Um, but now's the time for everyone to be anti-racist. It is not being political to be human and to have this conversation and to stop contributing to the oppression of an entire race. Stopping the conversation by saying all lives matter or stopping the conversation by saying I don't talk politics is literally killing people. Being human to another human is not politics. It's called being human. And that's what that is. So that's a cop out, and that you get a big buzzer on that one. Doesn't work. It's not political. I also feel like when people turn the conversation back to themselves just to focus on them not being racist, it's them grappling with the reality of the situation. And I get that. I get that. But giving yourself a moral trophy that you're not racist is not going to bring back George Floyd or stop tomorrow's George Floyd. It's just not. So, be kind to yourself and accept the fact that, you're not doing it on purpose. You're not an overt racist, but we are all racist as white people because we're benefiting from institutional racism. And we have to admit it and face it because it's killing people. They're calling for help. They've created this movement called Black Lives Matter because they're telling us, help me, I am drowning. My life matters too, not just your life. Because this whole system, the default race and the default acceptance is white people. And that's just the reality. So it's time to get over the discussion of yourself and your own discomfort and stop making it about ourselves and start listening to our Black brothers and sisters. Um, if you are not actively anti-racist, then you're contributing to the problem at this point. So it's really time that we create a lifestyle. Forgive ourselves for what we didn't know. Forgive ourselves for not taking action earlier. Forgive ourselves for not really sitting back and looking at the big picture and understanding that systemic racism in America and institutional racism in America and police brutality is a real thing that we are benefiting from as white Americans that is killing our Black brothers and sisters. And each one of us have the choice. Do we want this to continue? It's almost like when someone is blatantly, overtly racist, it's almost like, okay, at least they admit that they are, and we know their position. So we know that, okay, they're in that position, and I'm in the opposite position. But it's all these middle of the road, apathetic people that are really a roadblock at this point. And I really, truly believe that these are the people that MLK was talking about when he said it's the moderate white person that is the most dangerous in this conversation because they just refuse to have the conversation. And so what happens? The default is the status quo, which is just continue what's been going on and just keep letting George Floyd's of the world get lynched in broad daylight on American streets in modern day. So that's literally what your apathy is doing, what all of our collective apathy is doing. So anyone listening, I just really, I challenge you to just educate yourself, look in the mirror, do some introspection, forgive yourself, but just come to the table and admit, this is a problem and you can do something about it. That's the bright side of all this. We're all imperfect human beings. We all have a tough life, but there comes a point where we all have to finally hold hands and do well, we're social distancing, so maybe not hold hands, but we could elbow bump, whatever. But there comes a point where we have to get together and just say, okay, we screwed up and we can fix this. Because you know what? We can fix this. It's just us finally maybe looking outside of ourselves, not personalizing this, just looking outside of ourselves and making this about Black Lives Matter, making this about our Black brothers and sisters. Let's take ourselves out of the equation while we still have breath in our bodies. I can't breathe. Yeah, they can't breathe. We can still breathe while we still have breath. Let's just for a minute give some of that breath back to the ones who can't breathe and ones whose breath we took away and snuffed out their lives. Let's donate ourselves and our ears and our hearts and our minds to actively resist racism, actively take part in measures that resist police brutality and that demand change in our system. And we can do this. I truly believe it. Thanks for listening.